Hello, my name is Al Beatty, and welcome to LaFontaine Originals, Volume Number 3. Just like we did in Volume Number 1 and Number 2, Paul and Char Stimson are going to join us and help Gretchen and I present these flies to you. Several weeks ago, we met with Gary LaFontaine to work the scripting out for the flies herein. It was a fun 2 days. We laughed probably as much as the time we spent working. My ribs were kind of aching when I left Missoula headed for home from all the laughing. Gary has not lost his sense of humor, believe me. He's doing very well. He gave us some pretty detailed instructions on each fly and a little bit of history. And there's a lot of handwritten information that we put down as a last thought. I think you'll enjoy some of the things that we have to share with you. Let's start now with Paul tying the mess.
The first fly in this workshop is a fly called the mess, and it's a great imitation for large mayflies, size 14 and bigger. This fly has three basic characteristics that make it different from any other mayfly and also make it a great attractor. And I'm going to explain those three characteristics as I tie the fly, which is exactly what I'm going to start doing right now. I'm going to start my base wrap about a 1/3 back from the eye, and that'll remind me where the body ends on this fly and the wing begins. Notice also I'm leaving a long butt end of my thread here. I'm going to use that to help split the tails. The tails on this is going to be just some hackle fibers. I'm going to tie on 4 on this large fly, and then I'll split them 2 on each side. When I do that, what I'll do is that I'll tie on several and then just cut off the ones that I don't need. I'll measure them, making sure that they're the same length as the hook shank, and tie them in. After I've wrapped them to the back, now I can pull some on one side, some on the other side, and I'll take this thread that I left hanging there and just pull it right up through the thread, or through the tail fibers, and split that tail. When I wrap down the thread, it'll lock that in place, and now I can cut off any tail fibers that I don't want to use in the fly. It makes a nice split tail. Okay, the next thing I'm going to put on is the first odd part to this fly, and that is a strip of packing foam. A packing foam is going to balance the light spectrum in this fly. I'm going to tie it on. The width of this packing foam is about the width of the gap of the hook, and I'll tie it on and wrap it back and leave it there for the moment. The next part of this fly is going to be some dubbing, and what I'm going to use is a seal substitute, Sealex. I want something that's very bright and very translucent. I'm just going to dub this right to the thread, and I don't need to get any kind of a taper. All I want is a nice even shape, about 2/3 the length of the hook shank. And you can see from the color of this fly that I'm tying a brown drake imitation. And I mentioned before that this is for large mayflies, size 14 and larger. We use it for the drakes or maybe even a hexagenia. Okay, the dubbing on this is going to be the color of the eggs of the fly. And this packing foam that I'm going to now pull over should be colored the color of the body of the fly. In other words, the foam is the color of the body, the dubbing is the color of the eggs in the fly, and the way that the light bounces through this fly, that's the way the trout will see it on the water. It's important to have a portion of that packing foam go past the edge of the fly here in order to get the reflection that we need. Okay, that's the body of the fly. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tie on a hackle. I have a hackle feather, a real stiff fiber from a rooster, and it's matched the same size as the fly. I'm tying a size 12 fly, so this will be a size 12 hackle. And then I'll bring my thread up right behind the eye and then I'm going to tie on another hackle. This hackle is going to be a mallard breast feather. You can use mallard flank. I prefer mallard breast because they have a lot of feathers the size that we need. I want this a little larger than the other hackle. It's going to be a little longer. The way I like to tie it in, I'll pull some fibers down and clip the tip. And then I'll tie it in by that tip. I'll leave enough space there so I can tie it off, and then I'll attach my hackle pliers. As I wrap this, I want to fold the hackle forward, and as I wrap it, the leading edge should be the stem of the feather. As I come around, I continue stroking those fibers forward and get 2 or 3 turns. Okay, then I'll just tie this feather off and snip that butt. Okay, now for the next hackle. I want to dress this forward and actually bring my thread through this hackle and leave it up front so I can tie off the other hackle. Okay, now the purpose of this second hackle not only is to help float the fly, but also to stand up that mallard flank feather. I'll take about 2 or sometimes 3 turns behind this hackle, and then I'll come through, dressing the first hackle back, and wrap 2 or 3 times in front of the hackle. And what that'll do is keep that hackle standing up like a wing, and that's what this is supposed to simulate, is the wing of the fly. I'll cut off that second hackle and then bring my thread back behind both hackles. Now, to make sure that they both stand up, I'm going to apply a little bit more of the Seal-X dubbing right behind the wing and the hackle. This forces both of the fibers forward into this funnel shape. And then I can whip finish right behind that hackle. I'll trim off my thread and the mess is complete. Now this fly, when I talked to Gary about this fly, he had mentioned that he had 2 names that he could possibly call it. One was the mess, and that's what it ultimately ended up. The other one was Miss America. And I think Gary selected the right name for this fly. It really is a
The next fly that I'm going to tie is a foam spider. Any of you who have seen Charlotte's Web or read the story know that spiders travel on wind currents, and as a consequence, many of them end up in the lakes and streams. And it is one of the most important terrestrial insects that we have. Gary has caught a lot of fish on his foam spider, which I'm going to tie, and including from his notes here, he caught three rainbows over 20 inches on the railroad ranch stretch of the Henry's Fork. And any of you who have fished the Henry's Fork in Idaho know that it can be a very difficult stream. As I'm walking along the beaches and shores and lake edges, I see lots and lots of spiders. So we know that it has to be a really good food source for fish. This foam that we're going to be using is packing foam, and it's just this stuff that you get things wrapped in to protect them. It's kind of thin and it's foamy. And what we do is we take the foam, which is clear, and sometimes we use it that way, as you'll see, or we use magic markers in permanent colors. This is red. We have black, and brown is another good color. And we mark this foam with the marker. I have tried dyeing it, and quite frankly, with no success at all. So this seems to be the way to color it. However, if you just color it and tie with it, it comes off on your fingers, or it will come off in the lake and the stream. And I tried doing that too, and it just simply didn't work. So you need to use some sort of a flex cement over the top. I've used Aquaflex, and the reason I use Aquaflex is simply because it's water-based, and I feel like it's a little more healthy to use than some other things, and you thin it with water. I made for this purpose just a little brush on a toothpick out of hair. It can be elk, deer, whatever. And I always keep a little dish full of water to keep my brush clean. And then you just simply brush it. One thing about if you're going to use Aquaflex, because it doesn't have thinner type stuff in it, it dries very slowly. So you probably need to give it a good day to dry so that it will be nice and sturdy and won't stick to your fingers. We also recommend that you do a fairly large sheet of one color at a time, and then cut your strips as you use them. So enough said about that, and we'll just get started with the spider. Now the spider I'm going to tie today is going to be on a size 8 hook, which is fairly large. And we do that so that you can see it. However, as I walk around on the beaches and shores, I'm not too sure that this isn't a pretty good size of a spider, but we do find smaller ones too. I like to use my hook to remind me where to put things, and I want the head of this spider to be about 1/3 to 1/4 the size of the body of the spider, so I do my base wrap right at that point. I don't make this base wrap too big, just an area to work on is all. And notice I'm going to keep the end of my thread to use later. The first thing I do is put on legs, and we've had some controversy over which way to do this, to put the legs on first, the body on first, and I guess my suggestion to you is just to play with it and see what's the best way to do. What I'm using is just some dyed elk, just a big chunk of dyed elk, and I like it because it's got a nice consistent color and it's soft and easy to work with. Now, as you can see, like every other hair, there are several different layers and lengths of hair. Rather than stack this, I'm just going to be sure that I get those real short hairs out. We don't want to use them. And we'll just take the rest of them. And I've decided that the length of this should be about 3/4 of the length of the shank. That seems to kind of go with the size of the fly. So just hold on to it. And about 2 wraps is all you need to take. Don't let go of the ends until you get control of the butts of the hair. And just pull them up and trim them off. I like to come in from the back because it makes a kind of a beveled trim, and it's easier to cover it up. So we'll just now cover that up nicely. Once we get the hair trimmed and all of the end pieces tied down, this back piece of thread, I like to just bring it up kind of evenly between my hair, and that helps me later on know where my division point is. So it's just kind of a little trick I use to help me. And then I just tie that down nice and tight. It's not a critical thing, but it does speed up the process for me. And just trim off the excess. Now I'm going to come back down here, and I want to tie the foam on right where the tie point for my hair is. And that is a critical thing. You'll get into trouble if you don't do that. I have pre-cut a piece of this black foam that has been covered with flex cement. And I find in terms of proportion that it should be slightly smaller than the gap of the hook. And that makes it turn out just about right. Another thing is I started out when I first started tying this fly, tying the back on first and then the head on second. But I found that it really works better for me to tie the head on first. So we'll just put our foam down, take a couple of wraps, getting it in place. Now we're going to just make a loop of this foam. And so it just kind of is loop just behind the eye. Take a couple more wraps. Now we're making the body, so we just bring it around, and the body should be about to the bend of the hook or the barb, which is basically the same place. We want it a little bulbous. Those big old spiders can be a little bulbous at times. And now we'll trim. Now remember, the legs don't have to be perfect when we form them. This creature is in the water, so don't get too fussy. And sometimes, you know, your bodkin can help find that division point that you had. So we'll just pull this out and then use our thread to kind of make sure it stays in place. So I'm going to take a wrap right there and then bring it back kind of in the same place on this side. We're going to work our way through this side and just kind of spread those legs out evenly so that they're kind of splayed around him. And then when you're satisfied with that, just come forward. Whoops, we don't want to mess up the legs though. Come forward. And we'll take a couple wraps under the head. And on this particular fly, I like to use a half hitch tool to tie it off so that I don't mess up the legs. So we're just one loop around the half hitch is a half hitch. 2 or more makes a whip finish. That one leg wants to get tied down, but we'll just get him removed here. You better be careful, I'll cut him off. There we go. And we have a foam spider. Now let's just take a look at this foam spider from some directions. Look at how that's going to look from underneath. If I were a fish, I'd go for that. Now this is the black, and we also tie it in brown. And so I'll show you a brown one that I tied earlier today. And those are your 2 foam spiders. So if there's nothing else going on, and there's a little breeze, there's probably spiders in the water, so take this out and catch some of those 20-inch brown trout, or rainbows, whichever. Most trout love ants, and we're going to be tying our ant today in using packing foam. And this packing foam is not only translucent, but it also balances the light spectrum, and in balancing that light spectrum, it causes a halo effect, which really attract the fish to it. And so it just seems to be better than any other ant pattern. We do the ants in several colors, and today I'll be demonstrating with just black. And so I've got a piece of black foam cut here, just slightly smaller than the gap of the hook, and that's what we'll be using to tie our ant. I'm going to just put a very small base wrap here, just right around the 1/4 or 1/3 mark, so that will give me a tie-in point, an indicator of where I want the division of this ant to be. I've got a piece of black foam, as I talked about earlier, and I'll just tie this on with a couple of wraps. The tie-in point on this one is not as critical because he's got a fairly good division here between the 2 body parts. Now we're going to tie in the head. Just a couple wraps, and we're going to make just a little platform or division right in this area. Bring the gaston around here, about to the bend or the barb of the hook. Tie it down. Trim. I'm going to come back here and trim. Now we'll cover that up a bit. I have a hackle. It's whiting saddle hackle, black, dyed. And we're just going to take a couple little wraps here, is all it takes for this. It's very, very sparse. And tie this off. And I gotta tell you, that is one simple fly. I think a tyer could make a living tying these. And it fishes beautifully. Now this is, remember, this is a very large one here. It's an army ant size 8. And we'd be tying it in much smaller sizes to use. There's a foam ant. Look at how that color reflects. And in the water, it's even better. Now I've tied some others in some other colors. And here's my family of ant. We have a red one, a white one. The white, they found works because originally we weren't putting the Aquaflex on it and the color would come off and we still caught fish. So we used the white and then brown. And then of course the nasty one that bites there on the end, the red and the black one. And that's your ant family. Take them with you and see how they do.
The bread is a fly that Gary developed to represent a broken-backed minnow. And it's fished on a dead drift in the current with a little twitch every now and then. You'll see as we put the fly together how it will flex very much using a flex hook. We're going to be using a medium flex hook on this particular size of a fly. However, the smaller ones work very well, and you can go larger if you wish, though this will be about a size 6 on a flex hook. I need to prepare my feathers. We need to make sure that it doesn't have too much bulk in the materials. We start by stroking them out to the tips and stroking back. And as a feather, I was started to get it ready, prepared, and I see that it's got a stem that goes all the way out to the end, and that's going to cause us a problem. So I'm going to trim out leave a little V in the middle of that feather. We'll throw away that little part, and you see then we've got it just kind of divided there. Anyway, now we'll stroke it all the way out, hold the very, very tips, and stroke back along so that we can remove all the fibers that are shorter than those longest. And we'll just take those out right now. There we go. You need to do that because this fly is a creeper. The materials just have a tendency to crawl forward, and the next thing you know, you get to the eye of the hook and you don't have any space left. But I'm going to start now by putting a medium-sized flex hook in the vise, and it's the back part of it. And the front part, as you'll see as we go forward, is this clip. But we'll get to that clip here in a minute. But for right now, I will get my thread. I'm going to use single strand floss, and I'm going to start back from the eye of the hook a ways and wrap right down into the bend of the hook and back to my starting point. Just get a good thread base laid down there. Set aside that scrap thread, and we'll apply the tail material. Notice that I keep my tail material in a hackle pliers, an easy grip hackle pliers that my company sells. I keep a lot of materials in those because they're just so doggone handy. Now, I keep that hackle pliers on, and I just kind of hold it in my hand as I tie on that tail, made out of 6 strands of blue strand fluorescent mono. We'll wrap down into the bend of the hook and back, and let me get back to my starting point. The length of the tail is about equal to the width of the gap of the hook. Notice how that tail kicks down just a little bit? I'm going to unwrap a couple of these wraps till I'm at about in the middle. And if I just take and loop one loop of thread and go back to the middle of the body area, it pulls that tail towards the back, and that's what we want to do. Now, we're going to put on the bead mono, and that's about 15 or 20 pound mono. And again, I just have it anchored in one of these hackle pliers so I can find it more readily and just bind that into place. But you need a pretty strong mono to hold those beads, because the beads take a pretty good beating as you're fishing these. This fly does not catch a lot of fish, but it does catch fish, and when it does, they tend to be pretty good sized. Tie on the body material, which is going to be antron, and notice that I have that antron going down to the bottom. We want to make sure that that ends up down at the bottom. And let me wrap back forward just a couple of turns so my thread is about even with the hook point, because that's where we're going to put on our first wing. We've got to put 3 of these darn things on, so that's why we had to make sure we didn't have any excess material, and I want them to be about twice as long as the complete hook. And I'll bind them into position right there with some tight turns, wrapping back down into the bend. And back to my starting point. We're going to trim off this excess, and the norm is to come in and trim like that. Well, if you do that, you get kind of a bulky point. But if you'll take and give your material a twist and then trim off the marabou, you get a lot cleaner cutoff. And that, again, that helps reduce bulk. Now let me wrap the body. Just adds a little bit of sparkle there. And we want that body, we just kind of anchor it as we wrap forward on top of the body. And we'll go back to the center. Now we want one of our beads. Get that first bead on there. It's going to go up between that application of marabou right there. And I already have my beads on a bodkin. And I hold them in place with another, you guessed it, easy hackle pliers. Now I'll just set this down for a moment. If you set that bodkin at an angle, the bead won't come off. Anyway, we're going to slip this bead right over that piece of mono and get it into position. And anchor that down. And let me advance my thread back forward to the front of the body. That's where we need to be, is at the front of the body area. And I'll just wrap back towards the center, binding that mono into place. And now let me pull on the mono to snug it up. And the bead, the back of the bead should line up with the bend. You need to kind of work with this because this flex hook is fairly short and you won't have place to put all your wings and all that other stuff. Now the second wing comes along and we want it to be just as long as the first, and we'll just set that into position and we can kind of just dress it down on both sides of that bead and then bind it into position. And remember, the same thing as we did before, we'll give that a twist, making it easier to trim out. Okay, and there it is, it's trimmed out. Now we're hanging here in the center. Let's go ahead and wrap the body of antron and bind that into position there in the center. Now when I was tying this fly with Gary, we tied the next step a little differently than I'm going to do right now. Let me get this bodkin and we'll take this other bead off of it, and then we'll set the bodkin over here in the station. And I'll slip the bead on. And when we tied it with Gary, we just bound this into position right there and cut it off, glued it, and went on about our business. Well, I then found that that's not quite enough to hold it, and in fact that will come apart. So I learned on the commercial order that Gary sent to me that slide this through that back bead, and now we'll anchor them into position. Snug that up just where we want it, and bind that down real tight. Now we're in the middle of the body area, and we need to get to the front. And the easiest way that we did is to go around that like it was a parachute post with a couple of turns of thread, and then end up in front. Now we'll trim off the excess mono, and that mono, you see what it does is it's got a section that's hidden inside of that back bead, and that works out pretty well. And we'll just put this in our, we're going to tie a few more of these, so I'll just put that in there for future reference. We'll be able to find it. Have you ever noticed how that darn monofilament, you get it out and use it and lay it down on your tying table, and it's the last time you'll see it until you're not looking for it anymore. Now we're going to put on the last wing. And bind that into position. You're going to start seeing why we needed this large area at the front of the fly. This last wing has a tendency, if you were to wrap tight up against the bead and up to the body, it will kick out to the side like rudders rather than like a wing. So you need to have a little extra headspace, and you'll see that we need that headspace for one other thing as well. Let me bind that nice and tight. So you can see that's going to be a pretty good sized head, and that's okay. We're going to turn that over and wrap into about the middle of what I call the head area, and we're just going to get a little tuft of Marabou. And we don't need much. We're going to tie that on as a throat. Notice I'm kind of tying it into the middle of the piece of Marabou. And pull that over and bind it down. It just makes it a bigger tuft out of the same piece is what you end up doing. Now what you want to do is you'll just take and do it carefully, but pull that with your thumbnail and you kind of fuzzes it off, but it isn't real straight. Now I'll get this turned back over and we're going to wrap the head area in here and cover up as much of that as we can. Yes, that's looking great. Now the last thing that goes on, notice that I kind of held these ready for application in this clothespin. It's kind of nice to have your materials all put together and figured out, is 4 strands of peacock herl for a topping. Actually, it's kind of more, instead of a topping, I guess you could almost call it a siding, because it kind of goes along the top of the wing and the side of the beads, so whichever way you want to call it. The other thing that's really noticeable is when you bind this into position, if you had not made an elongated head and you wrap clear back into here, those items would be kicked to the side and they wouldn't be a topping anymore. They'd be peacock herl legs, and we don't want that. And that's the reason that we have. Now let me just go ahead and finish this off. And we're going to set that aside and get ready to do the next part of the fly, which is the application of the head. Now first we're going to put the little unit on the head itself. We'll come back and glue all that later, but for right now we're just going to slide the point of the hook down into the slot between the 2 jaws and anchor the head unit. And these 2 items in back, the straight part and the little hook, don't quite line up, so I just give it a little bend to line them up. And then I'm going to bind everything into position, put on a thread base, and close the 2 eyes, if you will. Whoops, I missed a couple of turns there. Until I get right back up to the front. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to prepare my foam head. And the foam head comes to you with a hole in it, and I'm just going to use my whisk scissors here and just shove them into that hole as far as I can and trim once, and then I'll one more time and trim, and what I end up with then is a slot in my foam, like that. And but that slot closes back up and creates a little problem. Let me set this down for a minute. We got one more little procedure that we have to go through here. We need to tie off our thread. Now you can use a hand whip or a regular whip, or you can use your tweezers like I've got right here. I've got a pair of bullnose tweezers that my company sells, and they stay closed. You have to press on them to make them open. Well, all you got to do is take a couple turns around them like this, slide them into position, slide them out, and you just completed a 2-turn whip finish, or 2-turn a 2-turn half hitch. Anyway, another way of doing that, set those aside, because we now need to use those tweezers again. I've got to tell you about the first fly that I tied on that order that Gary sent me. On the commercial order, I glued my fingers shut with this crazy glue that I'm going to use here in a minute. And I came up with this plan here of using these bullnose tweezers to slightly spread that foam so it would go on a lot easier. Now I'll lay that aside until I get this glue in position here. And we'll just apply the glue all along the thread base. And now, the glue is a Zap-A-Gap type of a glue. that we get at a local hardware store, Walmart, whatever. It's called Quick Tight, and then notice that it comes in a liquid form with a applicator brush, and that applicator brush is kind of handy. Now I'm getting ready to put on the foam, and I use this to keep it apart so my fingers don't get in there. And I'm showing you the slot, but I'm going to have to come straight down on it, so you're not going to be able to see it. But I just slide that into position, pull the tweezers out, and pinch that into position, and you've got a completed bread. You want to glue a couple of items, and I'll show you one of the places that you want to put a little bit of glue is right here between the two beads. I like to make sure that that is not going to come apart. And like I say, that does take a real beating when you catch a fish. So I'll just put a little drop right there at the tie down point, and that Zap-A-Gap will keep that in really, really good shape. I also like to use Aquaflex or Aquatuff on the head. I just don't happen to have any here right now, but that's a product that my company sells, and it makes a nice hard, clear type finish. But there's a bread. Enjoy yours. Imagine that thing twitching in the current like that. Wow.
The next fly we're going to tie in this workshop is called the Occasion. Now this tailless design is a fly type. On such an imitation, the hook hangs down sort of in this direction, but you give the slightest tug to on the leader, and the fly will upright itself onto its hackle edges. And it makes this design not only unusual, but extremely lively and effective in the water. So let me show you how this fly goes together. Okay, I'm going to begin tying about 1/3 of the way back from the eye, and I only want to wrap about half of the hook shank. So I'm going to stop right there at the point. Okay, I'm going to trim off my excess. Now I'm going to get a piece of floss to tie in. I'm going to wet my fingers, smooth it down so I can keep it under control. Trim off the edges. I'm going to tie it in right there, tie-in point. And I'm going to wrap back forward to the beginning. Okay, now I'm going to wrap the body. I want to keep it smooth, overlapping just slightly. Okay, I'm going to tie that off. Trim off the excess. Okay, now what I have done is I've pre-sized some hackles. We've got 2 cream here. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that they're opposing so that the natural curvature of the feather faces away from each other, like that. Okay, I'm going to match those up. Oh, one of them flipped on me. Okay, then I've got my Cree. I want to match that up and lay the bright side facing forward. Now I'm ready to tie those in. I'm going to trim off the excess, and I'm going to begin tying those in. Making sure I get those tips down real good. And I'll trim off the excess. Cover those ends. Okay, and now I'm ready to wrap. I'm going to make approximately 4 wraps. Tie it off. Trim the excess. I'm going to take the next one, the one that's closest to me, if I can get a hold of it. take this one all the way over to the far side. Yep, the second one. Again, 2 wraps. Tie it off on this side. Okay, now once those are tied in, I want to hold them together, bring them right straight out over the eye. I'm ready to whip finish. And if you have a few offending hairs, like I can see I have here in the back, just come on in afterwards using the rotary function of the vise. It makes it really easy just to go in and trim off those few that are sticking out of the way, and there you have an occasion. Okay, now here's how this fly is postured in the water. Isn't that a gorgeous fly? Now here are the 2 other variations. We have the occasion, we have the tantrum, and we have the aspersion. And as Gary says, trout tend to rise to the occasion. If they don't, you can throw a tantrum or cast an aspersion.
Anyone that's fished to a spinner fall knows that you're in for some awful good fishing. The problem with a spinner, though, is that because it lies so flush in the water, it's difficult to see. That's the purpose of the clear wing spinner. With a wing of clear antron, the brightness of the fly makes it easy to see on the water. Not only that, but it collects air bubbles, and it's a little brighter than the natural's wing, so it really attracts the fish. Let me show you how this goes together. Okay, I'm going to put down a base wrap, and I'm going to leave a tag end of thread sticking out the back to help me split my tail fibers. Okay, I'm going to take a blue dun hackle feather, and I'm going to pull off 2 fibers, and they will be used for the tail, and we will split them. I'll measure them about the length of the hook shank and tie them in. Okay, and once I've got those fibers, or the thread, all the way to the back, I'll bring my thread forward a little bit. Now I'll bring up the thread, split the tail, and tie it down. Okay, I want 2 fibers, so I'll trim off anything I don't like out of the fly. And leave 2. Trim off the excess. The next thing I need is a wing. And this has got a wing of clear antron. I'm going to go up to about the 1/3 the hook shank behind the eye, and I'm going to take some clear antron and I'll just lay it on top of the hook shank and do some figure 8 wraps or Xing wraps and tie that in right at that point. Okay, once I've got that in nice and secure, now I want to measure. I'm going to use my scissors as calipers. I'll open them up the length of the shank. I'll measure the wing and trim at that point. And that becomes my wing. I'll lay them out to either side. And I like to post the wing, so I'm going to take a few wraps right around the wing at the base. Do one wing and then the other one. This adds durability. And now the wing won't pull out. I'll bring my thread towards the back, and now I'm going to dub the body of the fly. For the body, I'm going to use soft dub, And I'm going to tie this in a black for a trico imitation, but you can use it for any spinner, any color of spinner that you want to tie. This is a dry fly dubbing, and I'll just dub it right onto the thread. And remember that this is a spent female, so I'm going to dub a real thin abdomen. When I get up to the wing, then I want to do some X's over the wing and build up a slightly larger thorax. And then I'll whip finish at the eye. And there's the clear wing spinner. When a female trico lands on the water to lay her eggs, it can completely cover the water with female spinners. And it gets really difficult when you throw your fly out there. There's too much competition and your fly's never taken seriously. Well, Justin Baker came up with a fly to combat that situation. It's called the drown trike. And what this fly does is it actually sinks under the water. A lot of naturals will get sunk under the water, and then the fish will feed underneath the water, and there's not as much competition. So with this fly, we have a better chance at catching a fish on a trico spinner fall than we had if we're just throwing another one. Now, the best way to fish this is with a clear wing spinner trico on top, and then use the drown trike as a dropper. Let me show you how to tie this fly. Okay, I'm going to start my wrap and leave a long shank again to help split my fibers like I've done on the clear wing spinner. And I'm going to select a couple of hackle fibers for my tail. I'll tie them in the length of the shank and tie that down. I'm using a white thread because I'm going to use that for the abdomen on this fly. And then I'll switch to a black when I get to do the thorax. I'll pull the thread through, tie that down, and trim off any tail fibers that I don't like. Okay, as I come forward now, I want to build up a slight taper to the abdomen of the fly, and when I get to about the middle of the hook shank, I'm going to switch threads. I'll start a black thread and tie right through the white thread and trim it off. Okay, I'm going to touch dub, take my Beattys wax and coat that thread really good. And then I'm going to take some black touch dubbing. This is black Antron, and I'll touch dub and wrap up for the thorax. I'm going to wrap this almost all the way to the eye. And then I'm going to take some clear Antron fibers. Now when you tie this in a size 18 or a 20, you only want to use about 8 fibers. This is a little bit larger fly so you can see it, so I'm going to tie on a few more. I'll tie it on right at the eye. Trim off the excess, and then I'll trim these fibers about the length of the thorax. And then I'll whip finish. And there's your drown trike.
Shroud, and Gary says that this is his favorite Calabatus mayfly imitation for still waters, and he calls it the dry fly woolly bugger. The Calabatus duns emerge, and the trout just cruise around in lakes and ponds to feed on them, and that's the time when you should be using the shroud. You cast the fly out, let it sit, and then twitch it. And as it twitches, the marabou tail will slither in the water and just drive the fish crazy. You need to put floatant on the whole leader so that it won't sink the fly. Let's see, I think that's probably all we need to know. Don't worry about the marabou tail sinking the fly. So if you want to grease the fly, you can grease the hackle and the dubbing, but don't grease the marabou tail. And that way it'll just float in the surface, and when you twitch it, it'll just go a little bit subsurface. So let's get started. So we'll get our hook here and begin our base wrap. Right here at about the half point of the shank, I'm going to mark that because that's where I'm going to begin putting the hackle on. So this could be a very heavily hackled dry fly woolly bugger or shroud. The tail is going to be red marabou, and I want to get it back here a ways because I don't really want to weight this fly. And if you notice, this is not real fuzzy marabou. This is the kind we want here. We'll put it in place, tie it on. There we go. Trim off the excess. Okay, we'll just hold this up and trim it. And now I'll tie down the ends, make a smooth transition area there. Next step is just to apply our dubbing, and today we're just going to be using some of this natural muskrat dubbing. So we'll use the touch dub method by applying some wax, and then I'm just going to stroke the dubbing along the thread, and that wax will just pick up about the right amount, and give it a twist. And now we'll apply our dubbing. Just put it on there nice and even. Back, forward, back. Let's go back a little ways there. Come forward, ending about at the 1/2 point. Had a few guard hairs there that we needed to get out, but it's looking good now. I'm going to just make a little bit of a base here for my hackle. Kind of smooth it out so that I've got a nice transition between the dubbing and the platform that I want for the hackle. We've selected two very, very nice Hoffman dun colored feathers that we're going to use for our hackle, and this is a very heavily hackled fly. In fact, most frequently you would probably use 2 feathers, but we find that these Hoffman feathers have such a high fiber count that you don't need to use 3, 2 is fine. So we'll just clean off a little bit to make a bare stem to tie the hackle in, and we'll just put it at an angle and catch it with our thread, bringing our thread forward. That makes kind of an angle in those stems and keeps them in there nice and tight. If you notice, we do have a little bit of a transition here. We call it going down the hill. It's fairly steep. You get that lot with shroud flies also. So what I'm going to do is just tie in one hackle at a time, and that way I can control. Now see how that flipped down? Well, when I come back with the second hackle, it'll just be nice and easy to get it in and work it in right there. So I'm just leaving a little space between each one of these, down to the eye, and I'll take a couple wraps. Now let's go back and get our other hackle, and we're just going to work that gently through the first hackle. So it's just each little slot will accept our second hackle. This just makes a really nice floating bugger, so to speak. Okay, bring it up. We'll take a couple of wraps. Trim them both off. Just dress back the fibers and take some wraps. And we'll use our whip finish to finish it off here. Trim off the excess. We've got a little bit of a wild hair there. We'll trim it off. And we have
Okay, I was just going over the notes from Gary on this next fly. It's the Marabou single egg. You know, there are times you need to use an egg to catch fish. Now, during spawning, an egg seems to be the only thing that will work. Sometimes fishing an egg is actually matching the hatch, like Paul did when he was fishing the box canyon of the Henry's Fork, when he caught a 25-inch rainbow using this pattern. So let me show you how this fly goes together. Okay, I'm going to start this base wrap back. I need to go down over the bend a ways and come back to my starting point. I'm going to trim off the excess. Okay, now for the Marabou single egg, we tie in a piece of lead onto the bottom of the hook shank. Another variation of this fly is the floating egg, and in place of the lead, we would tie in an Edgewater foam cylinder. Okay, now I'm going to place this lead on the side, slightly on the side, and let the thread torque bring it down underneath the hook. I'm going to just break that with my thumb, and then we'll mold that around to the bottom of the hook shank. We want to wrap it in really good. Now normally, at this point, I would lacquer this with some Aquaflex, but I don't want to glue my fingers together like Al did previously, so I'm going to just leave this like that. Okay, now I need to go back to the back of the hook, and I'm going to tie in a piece of Marabou that I've pre-stripped. You want to make sure that these are all nice and even. It's really important so you don't get some stragglers out there. I'm going to wet it down with saliva. Okay, I want to trim off the excess. Tie it down. Oops. Oh, I'm having a problem getting that to... There we go. Okay, I want to wrap back, making sure I get all those fibers in there. Bring that all the way forward to my tie-in point. Now, at this point, if you've got a couple that seem a little short, it's not a problem to go in and just pull those out. Okay, now we're going to leave that dangling for the moment. Get a piece of pink Antron. And this comes in 4 ply, and I'm using just 1 ply of the Antron. Okay, we're going to tie that in right here. Wrap back just over the band again. Bring your thread forward. And then we're going to wrap a smooth body. And then we're going to tie it off. Okay, I'm going to just reach in here and cut off the excess. Okay, now I want to take my Marabou and I want to bring it forward kind of tight and then push it back. See how that billows out over the sides? Take a couple of loose wraps to trap it. And then a little bit tighter there to bind it down. Okay, ready to cut off the excess. And I just want to wrap those butt ends down, forming a really nice head. And now for the last part of this fly, I'm ready to tie in my hackle using a scarlet. Okay, now I want to tie the bright side to the outside, facing forward. Trim off that excess. Okay, and this has a sparse hackle, so you only need to make just about one full turn. Tie it off. Do your trimming. You kind of want to stroke these fibers back so that they face to the back. And we're ready to tie it off. Oops. There you have a finished Marabou single egg.
The next fly is going to be a flex damsel, and then I'm going to show you the brand new flex dragonfly that we just worked out with Gary while we were getting ready for this video. Like all flex patterns, it bends in the middle, so a cautious fish comes right up underneath the fly and inspects it. When that fly bends by either a twitch of the angler or a twitch of the current, the cautious fish will lose all caution and attack the fly. It looks lifelike. Let me show you how to tie this one. I'm going to start my base wrap and wrap the entire length of the shank with thread and then cut off the excess. The first thing that will go on is a tail of black antron. I'll tie that in right at the back and let it stick out about the length of the shank of the hook. With that sticking out, then I'm going to take my little comb here and then comb out the fibers. I want them broken up so that they'll reflect a lot of light. Okay? The next thing I'm going to do is take a piece of closed cell foam and I'm going to tie that in over the hook shank, sticking towards the back. And once I've got that tied in, I'll trim it and then cut a second piece on the bottom of the hook shank. And I'll cut my thread, and let me show you how to recover from that really quickly. Okay, now that I've recovered, I'll tie that in, and remember this time to angle my thread underneath the hook point so it doesn't break it again. And get that tied in really well. And now I can cut off the excess. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is tie in a rib, and the rib on this fly is going to be a piece of copper wire. And I'll tie that wire in right on my side of the hook shank and stick it in my material clip back here. Okay, then I'll take the top piece of foam and I'll fold it down, leaving enough space to tie on a wing in front. And I'll flip the vise over and tie the back part down to match the front. After that's tied in securely, I'll trim off the excess. The next step is to rib the body with the copper. This will completely close up the body so there's no side part showing at all, and it also reinforces that body and adds a little flash. I'll tie that down right in front of the body, trim off the excess with the back of my scissors, and clean off some of this excess foam. I want to make a nice level platform right here to tie in the first wing. There's two wings that go on this. The first wing is of clear antron. I'm going to tie that in right in front of the eye of the hook. I've got a nice clump of clear antron fibers. I'm going to tie it in right in front of the eye. I'll let it extend back to the end of the tail and trim, and then cut off the excess in the front. Okay, now we cover up all the clear antron that's showing up right there, and then put on a whip finish and remove the thread. Now it's time to put on the front part of the flex hook, and it simply goes down. You connect the front part right through the eye of the hook, and then I like to put the front part into the vise and let the back part stick out the back, and I hope it stays there. It usually bounces around and gets in the way. I'll reapply my thread right at this juncture in order to close off the open part right here, so that back part won't slide off while I'm fishing the fly. It's also a good spot for a little head cement when I'm finished with the fly. Okay, now right at this part right here, I'm going to put in another wing. This is going to be a calf tail. I've already pre-stacked some calf tail. And I want to tie that in right at that point. Make sure that's bound down really well, and trim off the excess. The next step is to add more foam for the front part of the fly. I'll tie that in right where I started the back wing and wrap it down. Turn the vise over and tie on a piece on the bottom of the hook shank. Okay, once that's secure, and before I actually pull those forward, I want to close this other eye right here, and another good place for head cement. And then I'm going to tie in a grizzly dyed olive hackle and wrap that for some legs. I want to get 4 or 5 really good wraps. And now I'll fold the top over, a couple of wraps to hold that, and I'll bring the bottom up, a couple of wraps to hold that, and trim away this excess. Then with some real strong wraps in here and a whip finish, and the flex damsel is complete. I have a few hairs sticking into the eye right here I can get rid of. And that's the flex damsel. This is the blue flex damsel that I just tied, and this is a good imitation for the egg-laying damsel. This one that I just put in the vise is a gray damsel, and this fly is a good one for an emerging damsel. It's called a tenorel, and the fish will actually feed on this color as much as they do the blue one. Okay, and as promised, now we have a flex dragonfly. This flex dragonfly features a tail of pheasant rump. The body is brown closed cell foam ribbed with copper wire, and I have a back wing of brown hair, a front wing of clear antron. The head is foam, and the eyes are mono eyes, and the head area is also covered with brown ostrich herl. This next dragon is exactly the same thing, except we've substituted the brown for the olive. Remember that damsels and dragons are best fished when they emerge, and when they emerge is the best time to fish them is when their food source is more abundant, and the food source that's most eaten by dragons and damsels are mosquitoes. So anytime mosquitoes are out, you can use damsels and dragons. Both flex damsels and dragons are important on still waters, and that's mostly where they're fished. But don't forget, these are also great on tailwaters and any river or spring creek that has a lot of moss. These are welcome additions to your fly box. Give them a try.
Okay, I was just referencing Gary's notes. This next fly I'm going to tie is the diving egg-laying midge. When Gary was scuba diving in lakes in the late fall, he discovered that these adult midges were crawling around on the edges of the ice. The trout would cruise the edges of the ice, feeding on these adult midges. And obviously, an imitation was needed. Thus, the diving egg-laying midge was born. So let's tie one of these flies for you. Okay, I'm going to leave just about one eye length behind. Wrap my thread base, again going over and down, just slightly down the bend of the hook. I'm going to trim off my excess. Now I need to touch dub some black antron, and I'm going to use some Beattys wax. Oops, got just a little bit too much there. Not a problem. I'm going to take my black antron and just lightly touch, and that wax just picks it up really nice. And if you get too much, just pick a few pieces out. Okay, I'm going to wrap the body. Wrap all the way back up to the tie-in point. Now, as you can see, I've got a little bit of dubbing left over. Again, that's not a problem. Just reach in, pull it off. Okay, the next step, I've got some clear antron, and you want this sparse. You don't want a lot. We're going to make a loop wing. So we're going to just loop this over, and you can see how sparse that is. Now we're going to put the wing in place, and you want to make sure that the end of the wing lines up with the barb. I'm going to take a couple of loose wraps. Okay, I want to hold on to that wing. A couple couple more wraps to secure, and then trim these butt ends off. Now I want to tidy up that head. Okay, I've already prepared a hen hackle. Again, we're going to tie this in with the right side forward. Okay, I'm going to get a hold of it with my hackle pliers. And this is really sparse. I'll kind of stroke those back. Two or three turns, secure it in place. Trim off the excess, and then finish up the head. Now we're ready to whip finish. And there you have a diving, egg-laying midge. What a great fly. Okay, there are several other color variations of this fly. I've tied one of them. This is the clear. It's also tied in red, olive, black, brown, cream, and orange. Now the way you fish this fly is dead drift in rivers. In lakes, string 2 or 3 flies on a leader where it's legal to do so. Let your cast sink and then draw the flies slowly towards the top. This fly is especially good for fishing the high mountain lake.
The Black June is a hair-wing version of an English wet fly that Gary adapted. It's a very, very good beetle imitation. Gary recommends dead drifting it in the current like a natural beetle would do should it end up in the water. I can tell you this fly has produced well for me, and beetle imitations in general have done very, very well for me. If you don't know what to do and there's nothing happening on the water, this is probably one of the best searching patterns that you can put on. Now we're going to tie this with manga ringtail hair, the black part, and it's not real easy to get, and if you're not able to get that, you have some options that you can go to. We have dyed black squirrel that works fairly well, or you can use the black fibers at the end of a calf tail. Just be forewarned that if you don't use the manga, the next best choice is probably the black dyed squirrel. You want this wing to lay pretty flat and keep a pretty small profile, and the calf tail tends to have a little bit larger profile. But let's go ahead and get started on this pattern. First off, I have to adjust the jaws a little bit from the last fly that I tied. Let's see, I'd move that to, there we go. We'll just tighten those jaws up a little bit, and I'll close it halfway. What you need to do is be able to close the jaws halfway when they come in contact with the hook, and then you finish closing them, and that gives you a good sturdy purchase on the hook. I'm going to start my thread base slightly behind the hook eye and wrap all the way to the end of the shank. That's the start of the bend. We're going to wrap our tag right down into the start of that of the bend. And the tag is going to be constructed of tinsel, and we're going to use the silver side of the tinsel. And wrapping it onto the bare part of the hook. Notice that I turned the vise a little bit, and it sure makes it easier wrapping that tag by being able to look right at it. And for your part, I'll turn it up there so you can see a little bit better as to what's happening. Now let me back off some of these turns so I can come back and meet my tag and bind it down. And I'll trim off that excess and lay it aside. There'll be enough there for a couple more of these Black Junes. I'm tying this in size number 8 so that you may see easily what we're doing, but Gary recommends them in size 10 down to 18. You know, and beetles do vary a lot in size. Now the next thing we're going to do is you get the oval tinsel ready for the rib. And I find that I like to use thread torque to allow me to just kind of kick that down underneath and put this material on the hook on the underside. Oh, that's looking good. Now I'm going to advance my thread back forward in preparation for making the peacock herl body. I'll remove several peacock herls and prepare to apply them to the hook. Now, what I'd like to share with you is a way to make this peacock herl very, very tough rather than the fragile material that it really tends to be. And I'll start by just tying it on at the front of the hook, as you'll notice. Put my excess materials back down here on the table. And what we're going to do now is turn this into peacock herled floss by holding the thread and the material out to the side and allowing the rotation of the vise to form a herl. And you'll notice the herl starting to form right there by the hook eye, and the tighter we make it, the more it gets out this way. As we continue the rotations, the herl just extends its on out onto the thread. There's a problem that you need to be very much aware of, though. If you try to make it too tight, you'll end up breaking the thread and the herl both. But that's probably tight enough right there. Now we're going to demonstrate for you one of the real key neat features about our vise is the ability to apply materials using the rotating function. Also, we're going to end up making a lot stronger body by constructing the body using the front to back fly tying technique. We're going to tie this down right at the very, very back of the hook with several turns of thread, and we'll trim off the excess and set that excess aside. Now, whenever you tie materials together, the thread always leads the process, and we're going forward and we're going to bring the thread and the ribbing material forward together. So we'll place a rib as well as advance our thread. Now we'll just go ahead and bind that off. There we got. Now you can see we have a very nicely shaped body. And we'll go ahead and get ourselves some of that manga ringtail hair here. We'll work it out here and trim it off. Place it in our hair stacker and stack it. Now there's a really important feature that I had a difficult time with, and I can't emphasize it enough. Gary had me retie the fly 3 times to make sure I had it, is that the wing is no longer than the end of the bend. So you see where that is. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and bind that into position with several very, very tight wraps. Now let me trim off the excess. And I'm going to show you a little trick that may save you a lot of problems down the road. A lot of fly tiers do this with the hair still in their hands, but I'm going to do it on the hook. You put a little bit of this there crazy glue stuff right there, and then go ahead and finish binding it down. It's safer to do it after it's on the hook than doing it while it's still between your fingers. I can do it when it's between my fingers, but you know it would be awful embarrassing to glue my fingers together right on camera. I'm going to put a quick whip finish on this and show you one other little thing. Well, we'll come back. I'm just going to leave it right in the bobbin, and I'll just set the whole thing aside because we're going to need a hackle pliers and a good Hoffman hen cape feather. We're going to show you an easy way to fold it. We'll place that hen feather in the jaws of our hackle pliers and kind of just stroke down the fibers of that hen. And we're going to use the edge of our bullnose tweezers again, just kind of stroke down those fibers along the edge. And it just folds them back. Now let me come along this other side. And it folds those fibers back very nicely. Let's remove that pliers, and we'll take our folded feather and take it out. We'll set the pliers aside and the feather aside, and we'll put our fly back into the vise and prepare to tie the collar. Well, as you can see, that feather turned out very nicely folded. It'll lay into position very well as we wrap the collar. Feather doesn't want to lay right, so I'll lay it in position again here. There we go. And we'll trim off the excess and prepare to wrap this feather. Now it's kind of a good idea to stroke back these fibers a little bit as you go around. And notice where my thread's hanging. It's hanging way back tight, and then what I do is I use it to keep the turns of hackle pushed back against each other as I wrap forward. And we'll just trim off the excess here after we get her bound down real good. Yeah, that's going to be a really good looking fly. Let me stroke that back a little bit. Right there, it's coming in line really well. We'll use our whip finish tool. You know, my friends, in producing this video for Gary with the assistance from Paul and Shar, it's really been a very special time. I'm putting the final touches on that Black June. Got to tell you, this past weekend in the upper Gunnison Mountains, we fished the Black June extensively to some brookies. Boy, did we have a great time. Everything Gary says about that fly and the other flies that you see in this program, they're right on. They work. I'm going to use a little Aquaflex to finish off that head. It makes a beautiful clear finish, even though it goes on kind of milky looking. Let me set that Aquaflex down, and we'll use the rotating function of the vise to actually apply the Aquaflex. It's kind of a water-based flexible cement. As I say, it goes on kind of milky colored, and it turns just an absolute glossy clear. To all those here in the studio who joined us, we thank you. To those of you in TV land who will join us in the future, we thank you as well. And we thank you, Gary, for the opportunity to bring your flies to the fly fishing public. Good luck, good tying. Have fun, everybody.